in the context of international trade moving towards globalization, deglobalization, FTA, this bilateral, WTO, and I mentioned the word India first because ultimately we're going to relate it. Do you see any visibility of trends in multilateral, bilateral, FTA, WTO happening in international trade and collaboration?
So,
and we've got a lot of consul generals here.
So, there's a lot of talk, obviously, of deglobalization. There's more talk than actual delivery on the ground. Without question, the share, the growth in international trade, for decades, international trade grew faster than world GDP. That gap has narrowed, but international trade is still growing slightly faster, not dramatically faster, but slightly faster than world GDP. And our share of international trade is still very small. If you take trade in goods, we have a share of about 2%, under 2% of total trade in goods. So we have a long way to go before we have to worry about the overall growth rate actually in international trade being a limit on our own ability to grow. If you're China and you account for 15–18% of world trade and maybe 30% of world trade in goods, as they do, right, then you have a much bigger problem. Because then if you want to grow that, it's very tough. For us to grow from 2%, if we double, we add 2%. China grows its share 10%, and they'll have to add 3%. So I think we've got a long way to go before we need to worry about the international market not being hugely attractive and available to us. We should take full advantage of the problems that many other countries like China have to really capitalize on where we are now.
But for a moment, detaching India from this, do you think global trade, US, China are having their own problems, and there is a protectionism, Brexit is one form of doing, is really globalization a possibility, or deglobalization?
If you look at, in spite of everything that Trump tried to do with US trade with China, in the 2 years after he introduced protection in the US, trade with China grew in the first year, and trade with China grew again in the second year, right? If you look after China's, adventures on our northern border, when we brought in various restrictions on trade with China, our imports from China grew in the next year and grew again last year. At the end of the day, it's millions of smaller decisions that decide international trade. Yes, government policy tries to move things in a particular direction, but it depends on what millions of people decide at the end of the day. And I'm saying that international trade will continue to grow. It will grow more slowly, and we should take full advantage of that.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.